So today we're going to talk about kitchen gardens and what kitchen gardens are and how we can create that in our own space. Okay, so what is a kitchen garden? A kitchen garden is a garden where you put plants that you use in the kitchen. And so anything that you eat or you grow specifically for food is what is a kitchen garden. And they contain vegetables, they contain herbs, they contain edible flowers. A kitchen garden can cover all kinds of things. It's really kind of a catch-all phrase. And it comes in a whole bunch of different shapes, sizes, and layouts, and there are no rules, which is my favorite thing about it, but which scares a lot of people. So you can go to the next screen. Kitchen gardens are probably the oldest type of gardening. There are some records that say that the Babylonian gardens, the city of gardens, was a lot of very ornate kitchen garden style gardening. Middle Ages, the monasteries, monks always grew elaborate kitchen gardens to feed people outside of the monastery and to feed all of the monks that would live there. There are some evidence of castle gardens where you would have a steward who basically grew all of the vegetables for a specific castle in a space, and they would be very elaborate. In France, kitchen gardens are called potagères, and I apologize, I do not speak French, and I'm not from Scotland, but in Scotland, kitchen gardens are known as kale-yards. Literally kale, K-A-L-E, yard, kale-yard. And they are just the original gardening technique. We don't ever refer to our gardens these days as kitchen gardens, just because everybody thinks if you're growing a garden, you're obviously growing veggies. But there's a very big difference between flowers and vegetables as far as the way that you grow things. And so kitchen gardens just encompasses anything that you grow to eat. Obviously, I had to throw in some history here. Colonial kitchen gardens were massive, usually an acre or more. If you think of different plantations and different colonial homesteads, you would have huge areas just dedicated to food production, because quite frankly, you were not going to go to the grocery store and buy what you needed. And so kitchen gardens would contain vegetables, it would be their grains for feed for animals. They would use their herb gardens less for food flavoring and more medicinal. And so if you needed to grow anise hyssop to provide some stomach medicine, you would have to grow that in your herb garden and in your kitchen garden at your homestead. Kitchen gardens were usually grown in conjunctions with orchards and hop yards and berry patches, and everything that you would think of that you would go to the grocery store to buy today would be all in that one space for a colonial kitchen garden. There are some records out of Williamsburg where they talk about how they would have 1,000-tree orchard. And what they would do with all of that is they would have this huge harvest, and then they would use those trees and those apples to make cider. And whatever you didn't use yourself, you would be able to sell and bring in income for your homestead. And so kitchen gardens were not just a food source, they were an income source as well. And so that's an important thought to think when you're thinking of historical gardening. For kitchen gardens, most gardens are used to produce year-round harvests. Cultivars were specifically selected to be able to be stored long-term. And so when you're thinking about colonial kitchen gardens, your apples would be apples that would be able to be stored for months, usually almost into the end of May before you use the last of your apples or the last of your apples went bad. So you're looking at 6 months in storage. Potatoes were selected to be long-term storage. Things were regrown so that you could get the optimum amount of canning and preservation out of the harvest. So colonial kitchen gardens are far more extensive than what we think of today, because quite frankly, if we want to make a salad, we'll run to Pick and Save and we'll grab some lettuce and we'll get our tomatoes, or we'll go to the farmer's market. But when you're thinking of historic kitchen gardens, obviously you were growing everything for yourself. So we can go to the next screen. We're going to talk a little bit about my favorite kitchen garden on earth, Monticello. Janet, can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes, fine.
Okay, good. All right, so last summer I was able to go down to Monticello again, and I just absolutely adore it. Thomas Jefferson was a gardener at heart and literally would spend a lot of his evenings and his days in the garden planting and keeping records, and he was probably one of our very first horticultural researchers. He believed that the vegetables were the most important crop a farmer could grow, and had his research gardens, and his research is absolutely amazing. If you get a chance to really look into that, they would get seeds from all over the world, and they would try them at Monticello, and they would had these extensive notebooks of records, and he and his daughter would exchange correspondence about what was growing well, and he would give them ideas, and he would say, you know, when I get home, we'll take manure down from the animals, we'll try manure in this bed. And like, he was just really an amazing garden researcher. And so if you go to the next screen, their vegetable gardens are utterly amazing. So this is not a photo that I took last year, but it kind of shows you how they would intersperse. He has about an acre-long section of garden there that he just grows vegetables in, or well, they just grow vegetables in. Actually, Peter Hatch is one of the people who has now taken over that garden, and it's really just at the forefront of garden science and plant science, actually in the U.S. They have their beans. They practice vertical gardening. It's just an amazingly inspirational place. So if you go to the next, some of these are pictures that I took. He gardens on a terraced space on a hill. Obviously his gardens are huge, but you can do a lot of the things that you're seeing here in very small spaces. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So if you want to go to the next one. Trellising with sticks that you find. A lot of beans and things like that grow up. And so vertical gardening is always really handy because one of the biggest issues with vegetable gardens is the tidiness of the garden. Everything looks messy. And so if you're gardening in a small space, or if you're gardening in town, or if you're gardening and you care about how things look, trellising and just creating these obelisks and these kind of teepee-like structures are a great way to grow things up. And so they stay tidier, and you can also conserve space, because if you're growing your beans up a pole, then you don't have to worry about them spreading along the ground, and you can really maximize the amount of space you have in a very small garden. If you want to go to the next one, that's the book that Peter Hatch wrote about Jefferson's gardens and the work that they've been doing there over the last, 25 or 30 years now. Is she coming in? But anyway, that book is amazing. The photos are absolutely inspirational. It's beautiful. And so you can always, that actually came from this library. So they have this book. Woohoo. Yay. And so that is one of the, if you're interested in kitchen gardening, that is a fantastic resource. Joey, if you want to unmute yourself, you can ask questions as we go. It's kind of an interactive, an interactive day.
Are you sure you want this unmuted? I mean, that's why I'm late.
Yeah, that's fine. So the next few pictures are just really going to be some things that I have found that I have used as inspiration for myself. We live in the country, so obviously we always have deer. I'm always looking for ways to keep my garden safe from bunnies and possums and raccoons and deer. And literally every morning I let the dog out to chase out something. And
yes.
so
Amen.
it is terrible. And so I liked what they did here. I like how they have the raised bed gardenings. It kind of keeps everything a little bit tidier and more contained. But I have a bunch of pictures in here for inspiration, just because I'm a very visual person. And so being able to see some of these kitchen gardens in action kind of helps me figure out how I would like to set my stuff up. So this is one of the most beautiful kitchen gardens I've ever seen. Isn't it amazing? And so you can see there that they have certain beds. One of the big things with kitchen gardens is, with vegetable gardening, period, is to make sure that you're rotating your space. If you don't rotate your space, then a lot of times insects will overwinter. And so what is a minor squash bug infestation one year the next year becomes a massive squash bug infestation. And so if you're rotating your space, the bugs have a harder time getting to your produce. And so, you know, corn here one year, and then something else there the next year, and then cucumbers over here the following year. And then so just kind of keep moving things around. And one of the best things about kitchen gardens, well, my favorite thing about kitchen gardens, when you plant perennials and you plant, you know, things that are there permanently, you have to really plan for your space, and you have, you know, your shrub here and your rose here and your this here, and that's where it stays. Kitchen gardens, you get to start fresh every spring, and in the fall, if it was a disaster, you chop it down to the ground and you pretend like it never happened. And so really it's a fresh slate every year. And that's one of my favorite things about gardening with vegetables, is because I can pretend like it was awesome and nobody has any evidence to the contrary. And so kitchen gardens are a fresh slate every year, and so it's fun to plan. Now, over here on the right side, you can see how they've kind of trellised up and they've made kind of a pathway. One of the nicest things about this style of cottage gardening is you can look at cues of care. And so if you have spaces in between these very tall vegetables, it looks very kept, even though perhaps it's a little bit messier on the side. And so those mowed pathways and the raised beds keep things really attractive and beautiful, and yet you still have all of the space you need, and you can grow your raspberries, which are generally very messy, and just keep them up. And then they kind of look like, how beautiful is that? But they're very, very kept, even though they're growing in their natural state. So this is the same garden. They did rows of, I think there's some tomatoes in there, and there's just a bunch of stuff. Like there's beans on this side, but they also planted 2 apple trees. And so mixing your vegetables can help with pests too. If you have large sections of certain produce and you intersperse other things that the bugs might not like we were talking about earlier with tomatoes and basil. Bugs who eat tomatoes don't necessarily like basil, and so if they get a nibble of that basil, sometimes they'll leave the tomatoes alone because they don't want to be around it. And so interspersing and interplanting can help with some of the pest issues. This is a really cool photo. I am a little iffy on how handy it would be to try to cut things in these wicker spaces, but how beautiful. Vegetable gardening can be beautiful. You can take that for what you want. This is obviously a community garden, but I love, when I was first talking about starting my own vegetable garden, I was a flower gardener, and I was like, I don't know anything about planting vegetables, and quite frankly, vegetables are messy. But I wanted to show you guys sometimes that kitchen gardens can be exquisite just in their own right. And so the idea of using colors of leaves and textures of leaves instead of blooms can give you as much visual interest and visual beauty as a perennial bed with flowers. And so, I mean, that is obviously stunning. And so I wanted to add some inspiration in here too. So if you're looking for inspiration close by, the Franklin Conservatory has amazing kitchen gardens up there. They actually have a community gardening space. You can go in and you can look, and this is some photos that I took there. Obviously on this side we have some squash and some peppers, and if you see how they're interspersed there, all of that is, the diversity of that helps with a lot of the pest issues, and it also helps with just their general vigor. Growing things together a lot of times will stimulate growth, and so it's a beautiful little space that you can see. And I mean, it's so nice to work in a space that's that pretty. And then of course on this side they have their raspberries, and raspberries are notoriously messy, and so I loved the way that they use those forms to be able to prop them up so that you can get underneath the berry plants and weed and yet still have, you know, a good harvest. Here are some raised beds that they have. One of them is lettuce, and I think there was some chives and some herbs in those beds on the left. On the right is obviously cucumbers. And I love to grow my cucumbers up because cucumbers take up a great deal of space and they grow very well vertically. And so I will show you how I do it in my garden space in a little bit, but this is a really neat idea with just some simple trellising. So these are actually their community gardens still. So we have one that's left, probably some more peppers, but the idea of growing vertically and then staking things and then having things contained so that you can get all the way around them with fencing. They've got this bunny fencing over here because the bunnies can be vicious. And then I liked the way that they had their asparagus on one side, and then obviously some lettuces and maybe some cabbage maybe there in the middle on the left. So now we're into some of my photos. And I was telling Heather earlier, when I first started vegetable garden, I had these beautiful perennial gardens, and I didn't do any vegetable gardening. And I got remarried, and we had a little 1/4 acre lot. And my husband said, "Why don't you grow any veggies?" And I said, "I don't know. I just don't. I like flowers." And I said, "Veggies are messy, and sometimes they're really ugly." And he's like, "I don't think so." But he got me thinking. And so we had these chickens, and I used to container plant my herbs. And so that is actually the literal beginning of my vegetable gardening experience, was that pot of herbs that she's sitting on, because she was a very, very pushy chicken, and that parsley sitting over there. So that's how I started this whole potager experience. This is my summer kitchen, and actually I took this spring to show everybody that I had my bay tree out and my garlic there, and that bed is starting to come up. And so I took that probably in March when the sun was first starting to shine. The bay tree sitting in back is probably 30 years old, and I take it in and out every year because bay trees are only good. They're touchy at zone 6, and obviously we live in a 5B 6A gardening zone. And so every year I drag that thing into the house and I wrestle it back out. And we have a good working relationship, but it thrives there in that spot in the sun. And so that, I wanted to point out that container gardening is an option. If you're trying to grow things that don't necessarily grow well in this area, you can always throw them in a pot and bring them in the winter. And most of these herbs do very, very well going in and out, as long as you make sure you remember to water them and to give them the most minimum of care and a little sunny windowsill. I've brought in container tomato plants, small spin-leaf container tomato plants that are still giving me tomatoes in December. And so that is an idea of continuing that kitchen garden experience by bringing things in. That back in the left and underneath that window on the summer kitchen, I usually grow my carrots there. That's probably the only rule that I break where I move my garden stuff around, just because the carrots get good sun there in the winter. And I harvested carrots in January this year. We don't ever pull them at the end of the season. We just kind of let them go. And so I have actually taken carrots out of frozen ground. The ground's still about 29 to 32 degrees. And it's pretty much like keeping them in the refrigerator, only they get consistent moisture. And so your carrots will hold for a very, very long time. And that's one of the nice things about growing a kitchen garden, is you can just run outside from my kitchen to this garden space, get the carrots that I want, come in and make my coleslaw. And so that's one of the nice things. And we put in raised beds because it was easier to maintain in this space. That's a view from the girl's no longer there, but that's the view from the bathroom window when we were putting these gardens in. You can see I'm growing my cabbage there. The space doesn't actually look very much like that anymore because right now it's full of stuff and there's some more herbs, but this was the very beginning. And you can see there where my carrots are growing at that point in time. So, and then I staked up peas and they're getting ready to grow. But this whole space is not very large. These beds are about 8 by 6, and you can do a lot in a really small space. And if you buy even smaller cultivars of your vegetables, you can even add more. There are some peas that grow very tiny, but they produce a lot of peas. And the little miniature garden vegetables they're now bringing out, these cultivars are actually pretty handy, especially if you're growing in containers. So that is a citrus tree. I have several citrus trees that I carry in and out every year. They produce beautiful, that's actually lemons. And they produce beautiful lemons. And I have limes, and I have an orange tree. And they come out in the spring when the temperatures get to be consistently at 50 degrees at night. And then they go back in when things start to get cool. And I'm able to grow things that are completely out of my normal realm of ability, just because I container garden. And so kitchen gardens don't necessarily have to be traditional raised beds or traditional rows.
How did you get that?
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So I guess I never thought of raising this kind of stuff. I mean, my kids eat fruit like it's their job.
Yes.
The majority of my grocery bill is fresh fruit and fresh produce.
Uh-huh.
And I have a bit of a vegetable garden, but I never thought about citrus trees. So where would I get one to grow? Because I don't think you can get one around here, can you?
Actually, I bought 3 new citrus trees at Tractor Supply in Zanesville this year.
Really?
Yeah.
Tractor Supply.
Wilson's Garden Center, they always have citrus available there. I've bought their trees there. I'm probably up to 5 citrus trees now. And we're actually talking about building a small greenhouse to help me keep them in, because I keep all of my indoor outdoor plants, almost like indoor outdoor cats. But I keep all my indoor outdoor plants in my solarium through the winter, and it's kind of getting crowded to the point where we can't really get in there. And so I was like, you've got to do something with this collection. And so we're talking about maybe adding a greenhouse. But yeah, I just keep all of that stuff. I have an olive tree. I have a fig tree that I was telling Heather about earlier. I have this bay tree. I have 2 lemons, 2 limes, and an orange tree that I take in and out every year. A lot of times I grow ginger, and growing ginger is fun because you can literally just buy ginger root at the grocery store, wash it off, put it in dirt and in a shady place outside, and make sure it gets plenty of moisture, and you can grow your own ginger root.
Okay.
Let's see, what else do I cart in? Lemongrass. A lot of times I'll start lemongrass and then I'll take it in and it'll overwinter. I've overwintered my chives. I overwinter my rosemary. So anything that you put in pots that maybe you wouldn't be able to grow year round up here, I just take in and out. And then if I want a sprig of something, green onions. If you take the stock, okay, so this is really grocery store gardening and not wasting to its maximum. But if you use green onions and you chop up the green onion, but you leave the little white section of the bulb, you can throw that in a pot and it will regrow. And you will have fresh green onion all year round. And I usually, if I have green onions growing, I'll throw them in a pot and I'll drag them in. And so you can grocery store garden on a windowsill, or not, you can kitchen garden on a windowsill if you want to.
And it stays that small, the citrus?
The citrus can get really large. That's a relatively young citrus. That one's it's probably 3 feet high. It's bigger than it looks there.
Okay.
But those beds are probably, I don't know, 2 foot off the ground. So you kind of get an idea of how big, but that's one of the younger ones. But they can get 6 or 8 feet high. They can get as big as that bay tree.
Okay.
None of mine are yet, but we're crossing our fingers that they do good. So
That would be wonderful if I could get some fresh oranges for these kiddos.
yeah.
I never thought about that.
Yeah, it's fun. Now they take a consistent humidity. So sometimes I have to, how you can get those like humidifiers, you can put them in your baby's room.
Mhm.
Every once in a while, I will stick one of those in there with them so that they get consistent humidity when it gets really dry in the winter.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I'll trial and error. So
Yeah.
next one if you want. That's the bay tree. The reason I had that picture is because I wanted to show you guys that I grow the mint down around the bottom there. Mint is horrible to contain and control, and so I can just chop it off the sidewalk and kind of keep it contained. If I have cuttings and I want to toss them out by the woods, every once in a while I'll do that. It's rooted out there. The sheep like it, the chickens like it. So it's nice. And the bees really like it. So if you let it go to flower, it's a really good pollinator plant too. And I was telling them earlier, my favorite thing is when the mint starts to bloom and you can go out and you can grab some fresh sprigs of mint and come in and make mojitos or mint juleps or something like that. So mint is amazingly easy to grow, and it's super resilient, and it is beautiful. So there's another picture of my mint. That's an oregano that as it was starting to wake up this spring. Oregano overwinters great outside. Thyme overwinters great outside. Basil you can throw in early in the spring and it will come up fairly quickly. Cilantro actually likes to germinate at cooler temperatures, so you can toss that outside in between your plants and then have fresh cilantro if you like guacamole or anything like that. So lots of herbs that you can just toss right in the garden, and you don't have to keep them in containers, because for a long time I thought you had like herbs were really hard to grow, but if you toss some seed into the ground, they'll overwinter fine. That is my January harvest of my carrots this year. Well, that's actually probably closer to the end of February. We were still pulling out fresh carrots that were beautiful and delicious, and they're actually a little bit better after they get frosted. They turn a lot sweeter. That middle is my harvest of peppers and tomatoes from last year as I was cutting. I always like to harass people about doing things my way, and so I was like, if you grow your own food, you don't ever go hungry. So that was just a photo I took. And then that is when I pulled out my jalapeno plants for the last time in October. You can see my little Halloween decoration there at my kitchen. So that was what I took off of them at the very end of the year. So we had fresh jalapenos from probably July to literally at Halloween. Gardening spaces. I'm always looking for beautiful ways to grow my plants that don't take up a lot of room. This is a technique called espalier. And if you're trying to come up with some ideas for fruit trees, Joey, that don't take up a lot of space, this is literally just some stakes, and they've run wire between the stakes, and then they plant their fruit tree in the middle, and then they just prune off everything that doesn't run along those wire. And so you can basically make an espalier fence. You can do this against a building. So if you don't have room for a traditional apple tree, you could always plant one of these and then put up wire runners along a building, and you can put that directly against a building, and the fruit trees do amazing with this. They grow bigger and better fruit espaliered like this because they don't have all of these shoots they're putting up. And so there are a lot of gardeners who, you know, insist that this is the way to garden. I'm actually going to try to do this along the road because I would like to have another row. We're probably at around 50 fruit trees at this point in the orchard, but I have space for another row, but they'll be too close to the road on the other side. And so I'm going to espalier an entire row of fruit trees down our street, hopefully next year. And I'll let you know how it goes, but this is one of the ideas that I've been working on. Beans are messy. Beans like to grow up poles. This is an adorable little idea for a bean house. You're just basically chopping down saplings and stuff and using brush, but you can make a structure where you can grow your beans up. So just as inspiration, I love this idea. We will probably eventually do this at some point. And then you let your bean house grow your beans, and you can pick them from either the inside or the outside, and it just makes harvesting beans so much easier. So I've not done this. This is just an inspiration picture, but I'll let you all know how it goes. This is how I grow my cucumbers generally. I take cattle panel and just put it in a garden bed. I don't even stake it down. The cucumbers do that for me. They grow up, and it makes it really easy to harvest my cucumbers, and they don't get slugs or ground beetles because they're up high. And so they just kind of grow, and then I pick my cucumbers off as I use them. And that is probably the best way that I've ever grown cucumbers.
Would that work for gourds and those little pumpkins?
Yes, it will. My mother-in-law grows her gourds that way, her pumpkins that way. So these are 2 photos of new things that we tried this year. A lot of times vegetable gardening can be messy, but the right side is potatoes. We had a bunch of potatoes that were sprouting, so I didn't even buy seed potatoes this year. I just threw out my old sprouting potatoes because I didn't get to them, and they're actually growing really well. So we just kind of put a row of, that's actually compost, down, and then we covered it with straw from the barn, or hay from the barn, and they're doing amazingly well this year. On the left side are strawberries. And so it's just rows of strawberries that we put straw on, but just an idea to show you that you can, that your vegetable gardening doesn't have to be fancy. Like it can literally just be some dirt on the ground with some straw or mulch over it, and then you can grow amazing produce. Just plants have an unbelievable will to live. And so they will generally do well, just like potatoes. You can buy a bag of potatoes at the grocery store. When they start to sprout, we throw them out there, and they're literally making new potatoes for us. So that is our new hop yard. My husband and I thought it would be entertaining this year. We started brewing beer, and so we planted 5 different varieties of hops. All of them are hop varieties that are older than 1861, and we are going to grow our own hops this year. But hops are hideously messy for the most part. They usually run them up the sides of buildings. They're everywhere, and so we thought it would be fun to make this pentagonal shape and then grow them up to this arch. And we'll see how well it works. But the reason I threw this in here is just because I wanted you guys to realize that you don't have to necessarily conform to the traditional ideas of growing things. You can make a lot of your vegetable gardens design elements. And so we had cleared off that space for another thing, and we needed to put something in there. And so we decided to build these beds, and then we reseeded the grass. And hopefully we will have this really cool architectural hop yard in the side yard there. That is the space that I put in this spring. It's still in the works, but I'm really excited about it. And along the paths are all going to be herbs. I'll probably throw in some thyme and some oregano and just let it kind of take over underneath to fill that space out. But this actually was just a barren wasteland of dead grass last fall. And so that's the bird's eye view from my bedroom, but that's the new Victorian sitting garden. And so there's some allium and some things like that, but I'm also going to interspace all of those spaces with herbs, and so that it's a usable space, because you can grow vegetables and herbs in your garden and they will be beautiful and they will help fill out some of that space there.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. That grassy center there is now a river gravel path around that fountain. But the idea is that even though it's a beautiful flower garden, I can still, like, on the one corner there is yarrow, which is a medicinal herb, and the little plant by that yellow yarrow is bee balm, and there's some holly in there, but a lot of that is just, you know, there are lots of things that you would be able to use and to eat as well. So, and that is my final inspiration picture, but I just think that's the most beautiful kitchen garden I've ever seen. And so every time I think about what I want to do in my yard, I pull out this picture and my husband says, "April, put it away." But can you imagine being able to walk out and to be able to pick your food out of this garden? And so just as a little bit of inspiration about how absolutely lovely vegetable gardens can be, I wanted to throw this in there at the end, and we can all aspire to something even slightly that pretty. So, and that's it, guys. Do you have questions?